Illustrator has so many awesome drawing and reshaping tools. But before starting with any of these tools, I want to talk about some basic elements that contribute to the creation of an object. So let's get started. Everything we draw in the Illustrator has these little points, called the anchor points. If we connect two anchor points together, we get a segment. And by connecting two or more segments, we get an object or shape. If the anchor points are not connected together, then they are of no use, as Illustrator cannot render them. These floating anchor points are referred to as the stray points. After the anchor points, the next thing we should know about is the direction handles, or we can just call them the handles. A handle consists of a control point and the direction line which connects the control point to the anchor point. Handles are linked to the anchor point, so whenever we move an anchor point, handles move along with it. The purpose of these handles is to control the curvature of the segment. Moving the control point away from the anchor point gets us a convex or concave segment, depending on the direction the handle is being dragged in. If we move the control point towards the anchor point, the path is going to be more linear. And once the control point and the anchor point occupy the same position, we get a perfectly straight line segment. So these are the basic elements that contribute to the making of an object. We are going to talk about the three types of anchor points. So the first type we have here is the linear type. Linear anchor points do not have any handles, and they are used to draw linear shapes, such as this rectangle. The second one is the smooth type. Smooth anchor points have both of the handles present, and they are used to draw objects with curvature, such as this circle. Last but not the least is the hybrid type. The hybrid anchor points are part linear and part smooth. Let's take a look at the anchor points of this shape. The selected anchor point has a handle on this side to maintain the curvature of this segment. So it is acting as a smooth anchor point for this segment. The segment on this side is a linear segment. So this anchor point doesn't have any handle on this side, and acting as a linear anchor point for this one. Hybrid anchor points are used when the objects have both linear and curved segments, like this rounded rectangle. We will be talking about the Bezier curves and their types. Let's first understand what a Bezier curve is. A Bezier curve is a parametric curve whose shape is determined by the position of its control points. Bezier curves are used by the applications like Illustrator in order to create the objects and paths of different shapes and sizes. But they are not limited to the vector applications. 3D and CAD applications also make use of them to create 3D surfaces and splines for guide-based animations. There are three types of Bezier curves. First one is the linear Bezier curve, which is not actually a curve but a straight line segment with two control points. Next up we have the quadratic Bezier curve, and it has three control points, two anchor points and a handle on one side, which is controlling the curvature of this segment or curve. And lastly we have the cubic Bezier curve with four control points, two anchor points each with a handle. Now we have two handles controlling the curvature of this segment. And if we move this one to the opposite side, we get this S-shaped curve which is partly convex and partly concave. This is because of this handle, which is holding the curve from this side and preventing it from going all concave. So these are the three types of Bezier curves that we use while drawing. Now it's time to see how Illustrator generates these curves. Many people think that the halfway point of the handle is the highest point of a curved segment, but that's simply not true. In order to generate a curve, Illustrator utilizes an algorithm that does all the calculations based on the placements of these control points. And in this video, we will be looking at an animated representation to understand how exactly this process works. So let's get started. Here we have 4 points A, B, C and D to start with. And since we are working with 4 points, the resulting curve is going to be a cubic Bezier curve. Alright, let's connect all the 4 points together to get 3 connections. Let's put a point on the first connection that moves from its one end to another. Do the same thing with the rest of the 2 connections. Now we have 3 moving points, and connecting these 3 points together gives us 2 more connections. Now all we have to do is to repeat the process. So let's set up a point on the first moving connection that moves from its start to its end. And likewise one point for the second connection. Let's make a final connection by connecting the yellow points together and set up one final point on the final connection. Now if we look at the trajectory of the final point, we get a curve based on these 4 points. So this is how it works. And applications like Illustrator do all these calculations rapidly in the backend. So if we move any of these control points, the curve redraws or updates itself instantly without keep us waiting. Before starting with our first drawing tool, I want to talk about some display options that can be used to change the appearance of the anchor points and the handles. These display options can be accessed through Edit, Preferences, Selection and Anchor Display. Through this slider, we can make anchor points, handles and the bounding box appear bigger or smaller in the artboard. Right underneath the size slider, we have 2 display styles for the handles. Highlight Anchors on mouse over option highlights the anchor points on mouse over. Next we have Show Handles when multiple anchors are selected. This option does exactly what it says. Let's turn this option on and grab some anchor points. Now notice each of the selected anchor points have their handles displayed. Let's go back and turn it off. Now we have the same object with the same amount of anchor points selected, but this time no handles. There is one more thing in the selection group that you should know about, which is Show Anchor Points in Selection tool and Shape tools. Turning it off is gonna disable the display of the anchor points for the Selection tool and the Shape tools. So that's all for the display options. In the next video, we will talk about our very first drawing tool. In this video, we are gonna be talking about the basics of the pen tool. Pen tool is a very handy tool with really solid control that allows us to draw with great ease and accuracy. It can be little confusing for the beginners, but trust me, it is not that difficult to use. Let's start with something simple like this line segment to get familiar with the pen tool. Click on the pen tool icon to activate the pen tool, or just press the P alphabet key. The asterisk right next to the pen tool cursor indicates that the pen tool is not working on any path right now and ready to draw a new path. Now let's start with our first drawing. Click on the start point, then click on the end point to get a line segment. The drawing has been completed, but notice that a line is following the cursor. It is just the Illustrator showing us the preview of the next segment, because we have rubber band feature turned on right now for the pen tool. It also means that we are still working on the same segment. And if I click anywhere on the artboard, it extends the current segment further. I do not wish to draw this segment any further. So I need to break the link between this segment and the pen tool cursor. In order to do that, we can either press the P alphabet key or the escape key. I always use the P alphabet key because the escape key doesn't work if the rubber band is turned off. Let's press the P alphabet key. And as you can see that the pen tool has been disconnected from the drawing. That means the link has been broken and we can now create a new drawing separate from this line segment. Likewise, we can draw any linear shape just by clicking. This one is a closed object, so we have to get back to the first point to close the shape. If we hover over the first anchor point, a circle will appear next to the pen tool cursor. It indicates that clicking on this anchor point is going to close this path. Let's click to complete this drawing. And now we can start working on a new drawing. Here we have a path with both curve as well as a linear segment as our first drawing. So let's start with clicking on the first anchor point, then come over to the second one and click and drag to pull the handles out to get a nice curved segment. Now we have two handles here. This handle is controlling the curvature of this segment and this one is going to control the curvature of the next segment. If we click on the final point, we get an inverted curved segment or a concave segment. This segment is inverted because of the downward direction of this handle. We don't want a curved segment, so let's go one step backwards. We need a line segment, which makes this handle kinda useless here as line segments do not necessarily need any handles. In order to get rid of this handle, just click on the anchor point it is connected to. If we hover over this anchor point, a sharp spike shape is going to appear next to our pen tool cursor. It indicates that clicking on this anchor point is going to eliminate this handle, and that's exactly what we want. Alright, let's click on this anchor point to get rid of the handle. Now just in case you want that handle back, just click and drag on the anchor point to pull it back out. But in this case, we don't need it. So let's send it back to its origin. Now we can click on the final point to complete the shape. Likewise, we can draw this path with two convex segments. Start by clicking on the first point, followed by a click and drag on the second point. Click again on the second point to remove or reset the unemployed handle. Now click and drag on the third point to complete the path. So this is how we eliminate the handles while drawing with the pen tool. Now we will be looking at how to move the handles while drawing with the pen tool. And this time we will try to draw these shapes by moving the handles around instead of eliminating them. So let's start with clicking on the first point, followed by a click and drag action on the second point, and finally a click on the third point. As soon as we click on the third point, we get an inverted curve. We already know why this curve is inverted. It is inverted because of the direction of this handle being downwards. In order to flip this curve over, we have to change the direction of this handle. Moving it with the direct selection tool is also going to move the handle on the other side. So we can't use the direct selection tool for this case. But if we hold down the Alt key, it will invoke the anchor point tool. Now with the help of this tool, we can easily manipulate the direction of this handle without disturbing the one on the other side. We could have used the direct selection tool along with the Alt key to move the handle. But I prefer using the anchor point tool, as it is easy to access while working with the pen tool. Alright, let's get started with our second path by clicking on the first point, then a click and drag on the second point. Now the next segment we need should be a line segment. And as I said, we will not reset or eliminate any handles. So how do we draw a straight line without eliminating the handle? Well, it is pretty simple. All we have to do is to move this handle in such a way that this segment and the handle become collinear. In simple words, the handle and the segment should be overlapping. So let's hold down the Alt key to invoke the anchor point tool and move this handle like this, so it should be facing this way. You can also hold down the Shift key to constrain the movement of the handle. Now click on the final point, and there we have it. Let's start with drawing a cubic curve. Click and drag on the start point with the upward direction being the drag direction. Then click and drag on the final point, and this time drag downwards. Now press P to disconnect the pen tool, and here we have a cubic Bezier curve. If we use the same drag direction on both points, we get an S-shaped curve. So let's click one more time and drag the handle upwards. Now click on the second point and do the same thing, which is click and drag upwards to get an S curve. Now as we already know that unlike quadratic curves, cubic curves have handles on both sides. The presence of handles on both sides of a cubic curve gives us more freedom while drawing. For example, if we swap the positions of the handles, we get a curve with a sharp point. Tweaking a segment like this is not possible with the quadratic curves. Now let's learn more about cubic and quadratic curves by comparing few objects. For the sake of comparison, I have already drawn another S-curve by utilizing the quadratic curves. Now if we select this one, we will discover that it is made up of two quadratic curves and using 5 control points. Whereas this one is made up of only one cubic curve and it has only 4 control points. With that being said, both cubic and quadratic curves are pretty handy. We just need to use them wisely. Let me explain what I mean here in little more detail. So we have two circle shapes here as an example. One is drawn with the quadratic curves and the other is made up of cubic curves. They look identical, but this one has 16 control points, whereas this one has only 12 control points. Now imagine if we were to adjust any of these. It is pretty apparent that this one would take less time as compared to this one, because it has lesser number of anchor points than this one. So if we consider this case, it wasn't so wise to use quadratic curves for something like this, as it has created unnecessary anchor points and made it potentially difficult for the adjustments. I'm not saying that using quadratic curves is a bad practice, but just using them certainly is. I have noticed that many people use only or mostly quadratic curves to draw. They break down long curved paths into smaller quadratic curves even when there is no need. If we use unnecessarily smaller segments for an object, it might look alright in the end, but it's gonna take you longer to make any adjustments because of the amount of the anchor points. Moreover, the presence of unnecessary anchor points is a sign of bad drawing, and it may also affect the file size. So before drawing any object, always plan it and break it down in your mind. Avoid using unnecessary anchor points and use all the 3 types of curves appropriately in your drawings.